Has France just cost Western Sahara its last hope for independence? For over 50 years, the future of Western Sahara has been fiercely disputed. Although Morocco controls the territory, the Sahrawi people have long been promised a free and fair vote on their future, including the possibility of independence. However, in a departure from France's previous policy, French President Emmanuel Macron has now just announced that the only way to settle the issue is through self-rule within Morocco. So, what lies behind the French decision, and does it really mark the end of Western Sahara's hopes of one day becoming an independent country? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. It's a fundamental principle of modern international relations that people living under colonial rule have a right of self-determination. They should be able to freely and fairly choose their future path, whether as an independent state, a part of another country, or even to remain under the colonial power, albeit with a degree of self-rule. However, sometimes this right to self-determination is prevented. This could be because the governing power refuses to give up control, for example by annexing the territory or changing its legal status to suggest that the colonial arrangement has in fact ended. Alternatively, it may be handed over to another state as part of a pre-existing agreement. But occasionally a territory will be deprived of its right to self-determination when another country steps in and seizes control at the point of decolonisation. One of the best examples of the latter is Western Sahara. Although the United Nations had accepted its right of self-determination, Morocco seized control of the territory in the mid-1970s. But while the international community long held that it still had the right to choose its own future, that resolve is now weakening. Over the past decade, more and more countries have either openly or tacitly accepted Morocco's sovereignty. The latest, and arguably the most important to do so, is France. Located on the northwest coast of the African continent, Western Sahara is around 250,000 kilometres or roughly 100,000 square miles in size, thus making it a little larger than the United Kingdom. Dry and arid, little of it is suitable for farming. Instead, its economy is based on phosphate mining and coastal fishing. Its population is around 600,000, including native Sahrawis and Moroccan settlers. While the exact numbers are unclear, Moroccans are now believed to represent as much as 2/3 of the territory's inhabitants. Our story starts in 1884 when Spain seized a large swathe of the Atlantic coast of Africa, a territory that would eventually become known as Spanish Sahara. Following its admission to the United Nations in 1955, it was asked whether it had any non-self-governing territories, the formal term for colonies. After initially refusing to reply, Madrid eventually insisted that its African territories, including Western Sahara, weren't in fact colonial holdings. Instead, they were integral parts of the Spanish state. But while pressure grew on Spain to withdraw from the territory, a new factor began complicating the situation. Following their independence from France in 1956 and 1960, Morocco and Mauritania, lying to the north and south of Western Sahara, began claiming the territory for themselves, arguing that it was historically theirs. In December 1965, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution demanding that Spain end its colonial domination. This was followed a year later by another resolution, this time calling on Spain, in consultation with Morocco and Mauritania, to establish the procedures for a referendum that would allow the indigenous population to exercise their right to self-determination. By the early 1970s, Spain's position was increasingly untenable. In addition to pressure from Morocco and Mauritania, the native Sahrawis had established a liberation movement, the Polisario Front, which now pressed the case for outright independence. In the face of all this, Madrid eventually relented and agreed to hold a vote in 1975. However, as it became increasingly clear that Western Sahara could well choose independence, Morocco and Mauritania took their claims to the territory before the International Court of Justice. In October 1975, the court delivered its decision. While it decided that there were some links between some of the tribes and the Moroccan ruler and the Mauritanian entity prior to Spanish colonisation, it nevertheless ruled that no ties of territorial sovereignty had been established that would affect the rights of the Sahrawis to self-determination through the free and genuine expression of their will. While the advisory opinion should have opened the way for a referendum, events now took a very different turn. Despite initiating the case, Morocco and Mauritania immediately rejected the court's decision. Instead, just 2 weeks after the ruling, over 300,000 Moroccans crossed into Western Sahara, supported by Moroccan troops. Now seeing that its ability to control the situation had been lost, Spain began a hasty retreat. As Moroccan and Mauritanian troops moved in, fighting broke out with Polisario forces. However, the Sahrawis were soon beaten back. While Polisario announced the creation of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic following Spain's final withdrawal on the 26th of February 1976, Western Sahara was now divided. Morocco now controlled the northern 2/3 of the territory and Mauritania the southern third. Meanwhile, Polisario, which vowed to keep up the fight for independence, set up a government in exile in neighbouring Algeria. Although Mauritania gave up its claim to Western Sahara and withdrew its troops just 3 years later, in August 1979, Morocco immediately seized the vacated land, making it clear that it wouldn't give up what it now called its southern provinces. Meanwhile, to counter the ongoing Polisario insurgency, it began constructing a 2,700-kilometre or 1,700-mile sand wall that left around 80% of the territory under its control. All the while, it gradually strengthened its position in other ways. As tens of thousands of Sahrawis fled to Algeria, where over 100,000 still live in refugee camps, the Moroccan government encouraged its citizens to settle in Western Sahara. However, despite consolidating its position on the ground, Morocco's claims to Western Sahara were still unrecognised by the broader international community. Indeed, in 1984, the Organisation of African Unity, now the African Union, admitted Western Sahara as a full member, prompting Morocco to leave the body in protest. Faced with growing international isolation, in 1988 the UN and the African Union secured a peace deal, paving the way for a referendum. 3 years later, in April 1991, the UN Security Council established a peacekeeping mission to oversee this process, MINURSO. In addition to establishing the conditions for a vote and offering people a choice between independence or union with Morocco, the mission would also monitor a ceasefire between Polisario and Moroccan forces. Despite hopes that this would pave the way for a final settlement and perhaps independence, little progress was made towards a referendum over the following years. While the official reason was a disagreement over who should have the right to vote, it soon became clear that Morocco had little, if any, intention of giving up Western Sahara. This appeared to be confirmed in 2006 when the Moroccan government unveiled a new proposal that offered Western Sahara autonomy instead of independence. While the autonomy proposals initially made little headway and intermittent talks continued under UN auspices, Morocco steadily increased its diplomatic efforts to win round support for its ideas, including rejoining the African Union in 2017. By this point, positions appeared to be changing. As the number of countries formally recognising Western Sahara as an independent state dropped from a high of over 80 to around just 40, it also became clear that more and more states were beginning to accept the facts on the ground. For example, in 2019, the European Union signed a trade deal with Morocco that included Western Sahara, despite a 2016 European Court of Justice ruling that there was no legal basis for Morocco's claim to sovereignty. However, the crucial breakthrough came in December 2020. Just weeks after the almost 30-year ceasefire had come to an end following clashes between Polisario and Moroccan forces, the Trump administration announced that it had recognised Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara in return for Moroccan recognition of Israel. While many observers in the United States and abroad strongly criticised the move, seeing as an unacceptable decision to barter away the Sahrawi right to self-determination, it was notable that the Biden administration has failed to reverse the recognition. But while no other Western countries followed the US lead and openly recognised Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara, opinions nevertheless began to shift. Several major Western states, including France, Spain, Germany and the Netherlands, signalled that they now saw the Moroccan autonomy proposals as a realistic way to resolve the issue. It was against this backdrop that Emmanuel Macron wrote to the Moroccan king, Mohammed VI, on the 30th of July to mark Morocco's throne day. Reversing decades of French policy, he went beyond the previous position that Morocco's autonomy proposal was a basis for a solution. Instead, Paris now regarded it as the only basis for a settlement. More to the point, France recognised the Moroccan claim over the territory. As he put it, the present and future of Western Sahara fall within the framework of Moroccan sovereignty. Quite what drove the decision is unclear. While some would argue that Paris was merely recognising the reality on the ground, others have argued that it reflects the French view that Morocco is an increasingly important strategic partner. Meanwhile, some have pointed to a more cynical reason. France wants to secure access to the territory's minerals and resources. But whatever the reason for the move, the decision has already had significant diplomatic effects. While Algeria, which still supports Polisario, has furiously condemned the decision and withdrawn its ambassador from Paris in protest, Morocco has hailed the news as a significant development supporting its claim to sovereignty. Indeed, just days later, the Moroccan king invited Macron for a state visit. Naturally, the crucial question is what all this means for Western Sahara's hopes for meaningful self-determination. For a start, there's no doubt that this is a hugely significant step. As well as being a permanent member of the UN Security Council, France is also a central member of the European Union. Given that Macron also stated that Paris would follow through on its decision domestically and internationally, it appears France will now lobby for the Moroccan autonomy plan, if not full Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara. Of course, Paris would argue that this doesn't remove the right of self-determination. After all, it's restated its support for the autonomy arrangement. The people of Western Sahara should have self-rule, albeit under Morocco's sovereignty. However, while the Sahrawis will be given one form of self-determination, they won't be given the right of self-determination that fundamentally matters, the right to choose independence. More to the point, apart from Algeria's angry response, there appears to be little wider international condemnation, given that the issue always struggled to gain the sort of attention given to other similar situations, such as East Timor or Palestine. One gets the feeling that the tide is slowly but surely turning against the Sahrawis and in Morocco's favour. Despite repeated court rulings that Morocco has no claim to sovereignty over the territory, its ownership is slowly but steadily being recognised in what amounts to creeping international acceptance of its annexation. In this sense, whatever the reason behind the move, France's decision certainly appears to have ended any hopes that the Sahrawi people will ever have a free and fair vote on their future. 50 years after Morocco seized control of the territory, it seems that Western Sahara's hopes of independence are now all but gone. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.